stuff, or I'm sorry, in the support for 4B is mainly, can you work with decimals and percents? Because if you can't, it's really hard to type all that stuff in the calculator. And we've emphasized a lot that you need to be able to change from a percent to a decimal, because when you're using the formulas, you don't type them in as a percent, you type them in as a decimal. Good morning. And so 74%, if we want to make that into a decimal, then we need to do what? Anybody know? You need to divide by 100. So if you're given the percent and you want to make it into a decimal, you just divide by 100, which is going to be 0.74. Okay, and so that's what the answer to this one is. This is support for 4B. We're kind of going back, and then we're going to do the support quiz next. Then we're going to move to chapter 5 on Wednesday. But that's that. We already did 4B, and we've done the last section of chapter 4. Yeah, we're done with chapter 4. Okay, but if you have any questions, feel free to, that's fine, to ask. Find decimal notation. Well, if it's, this would be similar to what we just did, right? If it's a percent and we want decimal, then we're going to divide by 100. And most of the time, I'll hear a lot of students say, well, just move the decimal over 2 places, right? You just move the decimal over 2 places. It's the same thing as dividing by 100. But if I say divide by 100, somehow that sticks a little bit better. Number 3, find percent notation. So they're giving us the decimal, so we're going backwards, right? So if we're going from the decimal to a percent, instead of dividing by 100, we're going to need to multiply by 100, which is also moving the decimal 2 places. But this time it's to the right, and it's going to be 27%. Okay. So number 4 says find percent notation for 0.09. So this time same thing, we've got a decimal and we want to go to percent. So when we're doing that, we're multiplying by 100, which is going to give me 9%. We're good? Okay. Then we've got down here that we've got a fraction. That's weird. So if I want to make a fraction into a percent, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change it to a decimal. So I'm going to do 5 divided by 100. Okay, and it's going to give me 0.05. And I'm going to know, now sometimes you can get a percent for a decimal. A decimal for a percent, sorry. But, you guys know, if you made 5 points out of 100 on a test, right, you got 5.05 as a decimal, but we still want, they're asking the answer in percent, so I'm going to have to do what? Multiply by 100 to get it to be my 5% that they're asking for. Okay. Okay, so we've got 3/5. So we're going to do, first thing we're going to do is 3 divided by 5, which gets us a decimal of 0.60. And they want the answer as a percent, so I'm going to have to multiply by 100 to make that happen. So 60%, right? This is not complicated, but if you don't know how to do this, it's really hard to plug in all those formulas on chapter 4. Okay? And we're fixing to go over some of that in that support quiz. So express the following number as a decimal and as a percentage. So first thing we're going to do is 2 divided by 5, which is going to get me 0.40. Well, that's my decimal. To get it to a percentage, I have to take that same number and multiply it by 100, which is going to get me 40. Questions? This stuff's pretty straightforward. And that's kind of what the support is for going over things that you need to know before you're able to do the real lesson, because you're going to struggle if you don't know how to do this in the real lesson. So on problem number 8, it's got find or put in percent notation. Well, we're going to do 2 divided by 3, and this one turns out to be some crazy, like we've got, and on your calculator screen it probably does something like this and eventually says a 7 at the end, right? But is that really a 7? Like, it's because the calculator rounded, right? That would really be a 0.6 that just went on forever, right? And at the end the calculator screen rounded, so that's what we got. Now when we're talking about percentage, we said we were going to take this number and then multiply that by 100. And they've got it rounded so that it looks like this when they do that. That's going to be our percent, 66.7. Okay, how did we know to do that? Because here, when we type this on the calculator, this is what we get, right? And so if we take that and multiply by 100, this is not going to be the answer that comes up. Do y'all agree? It's basically going to be whatever this was, and they're going to move the decimal over 2. So it would be like 66 point, and it would keep doing this thing. But the way that I knew to round was because the directions said round to the nearest tenth, and the tenth is the first decimal place. What's the second decimal place? The hundredths place. Those two for sure in this class. You want to know that the first decimal place is the tenth, the second decimal place is the hundredth. So they're saying stop right here. So you would need to look next door, and if that number is 5 or bigger, you round up. So that's how they've gotten the 66.7%. Okay. Some of you probably get a little bit frustrated because you're like, that's what I put, right? Just make sure you pay attention to what the directions, because sometimes it'll tell you to round to something and it's like, oh, I didn't do that. Okay, so find the percent notation. We're going to do 4 divided by 6. Well, that's also all this crazy thing. Same thing, because 4 divided by 6 is just 2/3, right? They're just a reduced fraction. So when we move our decimal, or when we multiply by 100, we would get 66 point something like this, and then it says to round to the 10th. So we should get the exact same thing again, 66.7. Because those were the same fractions. One of them, 4/6 and 2/3 are the same, right? Do I need to explain why? Are y'all good? I don't mind at all. Okay. Okay, so this is the last problem that we need to work on this. And it says express the following fraction as a decimal and as a percentage. Well, we've been doing this. So
I have a question. Do we always divide it or multiply it by 100?
when we're going from, the question was, do we always divide or multiply by 100? If you're going from a percent to a decimal, so I'll just write that on here. If we're going from a percent and we want the decimal, we're always going to divide by 100. If we're going from a decimal to a percent, we're always going to multiply by 100. So the answer to that question is a little bit loaded. It depends on what you're doing. You know, if you're wanting to go from a percent, if you got a percent, you're trying to get a decimal, you want to divide by 100. If you're going from a decimal to a percent, that's when you multiply 100. And this one's asking us to take 5/9 and make it a decimal. So the first thing I need to do is, if you're given a fraction, you just have to divide it. So 5 divided by 9 that comes out a little bit crazy, 0.555, and it just, my calculator keeps doing that until it finally runs out of room and then says a 6. Okay, so now I know that they're probably not going to want me to put that in the answer blank. Let me scroll down a little bit. So it says type an integer or decimal rounded to. This is important. This time it says rounded to 2 decimal places. So what we would want to type, we're supposed to stop at the hundredths place because that's 2 decimal places. So we would go, okay, let's look next door. That's a 5 or bigger, so this whole thing is going to round to 0.56. We're going to have to round up because this 5 right here made us round this 5 up because it said round to 2 decimal places. Are we good with that? Okay, now, this is a little bit tricky because they also want us to round the percent to 2 decimal places. So while this is on my screen, I need to say, oh, I need to change my decimal to a percent, so I need to multiply this by 100. Well, that's going to get me 55.55556, right? I don't want to do my rounded because then it's going to mess up this rounding because I've got to round to 2 decimal places. So, back this up, sorry. Okay, so now my 2 decimal places would be right here under this 5, and I would look next door, and that's going to make that be 55.56. We're rounding up this, the second decimal place, because that's what it told me to round to, right? So 55.56.